Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, I want to talk about 3 things that you can do to help you see more deer without ever having to put in a habitat improvement. Most of the videos on this channel are geared towards private landowners manipulating the habitat by putting in different types of improvements in order to create more consistent and predictable deer movement. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If you are able to put in habitat improvements, you're going to have a significant advantage over somebody who does not. However, there are a few things that you can do as a landowner in order to increase your chances of seeing deer without putting in a single improvement. Because let's be honest, not everyone has the same amount of time that they can dedicate to habitat improvements. Not everyone has the same financial resources that they can put towards their hunting property. Everyone's situation is different and not everyone is able to put in improvements. But again, fortunately, there are a few things that we can do to help increase our chances of seeing deer without putting in a single habitat improvement. And the first thing that you need to do on your property if you want to start seeing more deer without doing any habitat improvement is the most important one, and that's to scout it. And even without putting in any type of habitat improvements on your property, there is going to be some sort of a pattern that those deer are taking part in every single day. Whether you hold the bedding on your property, whether you hold the food sources, maybe you have what's called a pasture property, the deer are just traveling through to get from bedding to the food source. The deer are going to have some sort of a daily routine, and they're going to be leaving you clues as to what that is. So again, the first thing that you need to do if you want to see more deer on your property without putting in habitat improvements is you need to scout. And there are better times to scout throughout the year to be more efficient. During the summer months when there is a lot of growth, there's a lot of vegetation that's very tall. Sometimes it can be tough to read the deer sign. Those scrapes are covered up with new grass. And some of those smaller trails, sometimes those sneak trails, are covered up by vegetation. So if you're scouting in the summer, you could miss a lot of the deer sign from the year before. Another time that I would avoid scouting heavily is during the season. The deer are going to be laying down a lot of sign during the fall, but you just don't want to be walking around your entire property trying to figure it out during the fall. All you're going to do is push them off, and that's going to reduce the chances of you seeing deer. Now, that does not mean you're not scouting throughout the hunting season. Remember, the deer are laying down a lot of sign throughout the fall. It's just best to do your scouting on the way to and from the stand and while you're on stand. Try to take in as much as you can from the stand. Where are these deer coming from? Where does it feel like they want to be going? Are there preferred trails over others? Are they being pinched down or consolidated in any part of your property, giving you a potential high odds stand location? You can learn a lot about your property and how deer move through your property just from observing from the deer stand. Now again, without putting in habitat improvements and depending on how long you've been hunting, it might take you a few years to really lock in on that high odds stand location, but it can be done even without putting in any habitat improvements. If for some reason throughout this hunting season you just did not see a whole lot of deer activity from the tree, it can be pretty tough to narrow down that next best stand location. However, there is another great time to scout your property, and it's my favorite time to scout throughout the year, and that's immediately following the hunting season. As soon as the season is over, all of that deer sign on your property will still be there. It will be fresh. And that's a great time for you and your hunting buddies to hit the woods and figure out what the deer are doing on your property. If you have a subscription to some of these hunting apps or even running apps they have GPS tracking software. So when you're walking around, it will track your movement, or those running apps that, as you're running down the road, it kind of tracks your route so you can log how far you ran. This is a great way to map the deer trails on your property. For the most part, deer travel with a purpose. There is a reason that they're using that particular trail. And so if you can map as many trails on your property as possible, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but trust me, it'll be worth it. If you can map those trails, you will be able to find high odds stand locations. There are going to be a few areas on your property where you're going to have intersecting trails. These are your higher odds stand locations. Whether the deer movement on your property is being pinched down or consolidated by some sort of habitat feature, or you have a main trail intersecting with another main trail, you just found high odds stand locations without having to put in any type of habitat improvements. So if you don't think that you're going to be able to put in any habitat improvements this coming off season, just try your best to make some time to scout your property following the hunting season. The second thing that you can do on your property to see more deer without having to put in any habitat improvements is to run a few trail cameras. You can learn so much about the deer, not only on your property, but in the neighborhood as well by running a few trail cameras. If you're only able to put out a few trail cameras on your property, try your best to put them over a perennial scrape where multiple trails are coming together. And if you can, try to run 2 cameras on your property, one on a primary perennial scrape near bedding and one on a primary perennial scrape near a food source. Now this depends on if you have bedding and a food source on your property. And if you're able to do this, this can give you a lot of good information. The first thing this is going to help you figure out is the inventory of the deer, especially those bucks that are on your property and in the area. The deer on your property are going to use those scrapes all year long, whether that's the does, the fawns, the bucks. They're using those scrapes to communicate with one another. And if you have a few cameras in those locations, you're gonna have a pretty good idea as to how many deer are using your property and how many different bucks you have in the neighborhood. So cameras not only help you get an inventory of your deer herd, but they help you pattern your deer herd as well. If you want to see more deer and more bucks while you're hunting your property, then you need to know when and where they're moving. Regardless of what your hunting goals are, if you're just trying to fill the freezer or if you're trying to shoot a particular buck, those cameras can tell you when they're consistently moving in daylight. To give you guys an example, on one of our properties, the older bucks in that area do not really start moving consistently during daylight until about the 20th or the 24th of October. So it doesn't really make much sense to put in a lot of time in those areas before that day because there's a low chance that those deer are going to be walking by our stands. And again, we're able to figure that out because we've run trail cameras on that property for the last 11 years. If for some reason a particular camera is not getting many pictures, or maybe a lot of those pictures are at night, that could either be a reflection of the hunting pressure on the property, or maybe that camera is in a poor location. And just like with our stand locations and how those need to be moved from time to time, the trail cameras are no different. If they're in a poor location, that needs to be adjusted as well to help us both pattern and see more deer. So as a landowner, even without putting in any habitat improvements, you can use trail cameras to find really high odds stand locations to help you see and have opportunities at more deer. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about in this video to help you guys see more deer without having to put in any habitat improvements is something that you can do after every hunt. And it might take you a little bit of time after every hunt, but not that long, and it's worth it. And that's to log every hunt. And there might even be a section for logs on some of these hunting apps. If there isn't, that's a good opportunity for one of these companies to jump on that. But we've always done it the old-fashioned way. We have a 3-ring binder with a sheet of paper for every single hunt, and we have a binder from each hunting season going back to 2010. And the first year that you do it, just like when you first start putting out trail cameras and saving those pictures, it might not seem like logging your hunts is giving you a whole lot of relevant information, but as you start compiling the years and you have 2, 3, 4, 5 years of information of every single time you've hunted that property, that's going to really help you understand how deer are using certain parts of your property during certain times of the season, but it's also going to help you understand how deer use certain parts of your property at different times of the day, during different weather events. As hunters, we always remember bits and pieces of particular hunts, but we don't always remember all of the details. And this is where having that log comes in. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to be able to remember everything that's on there, but we try to put down the time we left in the morning, the time we got to the stand, the time we left the stand, how many antlerless deer did we see, how many antlered deer did we see, the age of the antlered deer, what were they doing, which directions were they traveling, what was the temperature, wind direction, wind speed, was it cloudy, was it sunny, what's the barometric pressure. And the bottom half of each page within the log is blank. And this is so if the hunter wants to, he can better describe what the deer were doing in detail on that particular hunt. And if you have every single hunter on your property take 3 minutes to complete a log after each hunt, you're going to compile a lot of information in a short period of time. And once you have all this information, you can go as crazy with it as you want. You can simply just look back to last year on that particular day and see what the deer were doing, or you can enter all this information into an Excel spreadsheet and see how deer move differently during different times of the year, or how weather impacts the deer movement. The more information that you can put down, and again, if you can get each one of your hunters to fill one out, you're gonna have a lot more information, and this is gonna help you make better decisions as a hunter, which is gonna translate into you seeing more deer without ever having to put in a habitat improvement. Well guys, it's gonna wrap it up for this video on things that you can do to see more deer on your property without putting in a single habitat improvement. And again, I'm not gonna lie, putting in habitat improvements is gonna significantly increase your chances of both seeing deer and creating consistent, predictable patterns. But again, I understand that not everyone is able to put in improvements. If you guys have any additional tips on how you can see more deer without having to put in any habitat improvements, I'd love to hear about them. If you have any questions, please drop those in the comment section below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can, and we will see you guys in the next video.